£729. That's how much this Acer Nitro 5 costs, brand new from Argos of all places. In today's inflated world, £729 is one of the cheapest gaming laptops on the market, certainly from a more reputable brand anyway, and with a reasonably modern spec. For that, you get an 8-core CPU, RTX GPU, and even a 144Hz display. What's not to like then? Well, a lot. See, it's really easy to mislead people with buzzwords and skewed specs. That 8-core CPU is an i5-12450H, which has 4 full-fat performance cores and 4 low-power efficiency cores. That means that, in terms of performance, you have like 5 cores worth of performance here, despite having 8 cores total. You also only get 8GB of RAM in this model, which, as you'll find out, really isn't enough for modern AAA games. You also only get 512GB of SSD space, which can hold like 3 games these days, maybe? As for that RTX GPU, that's an RTX 4050 mobile with 6GB of VRAM and a 140W total graphics power rating, aka it's the lowest end RTX GPU available. Oh, and that 144Hz display is a real treat too. Despite all that, for the price tag, it's pretty hard to argue that this isn't a decent amount of machine for your cash, right? Well, to answer that one, let's take a look at how it performs. Now, my results are going to be a bit skewed here because I haven't tested any other RTX 4050 laptops, nor anything else that's really all that close to this price range, so you can expect this to be at the bottom of every chart, but what will be interesting is seeing how close it gets to the higher end machines, and just what performance it can offer outright. In fact, I want to start with just showing you the results that I collected for the Nitro 5 on the road. Here they are. You can see we get over 200 FPS in both Rainbow Six Siege on medium and CS2 on low. You get 137 FPS average in Hitman 3, 116 FPS in Shadow of the Tomb Raider, nearly 80 FPS in Cyberpunk on medium, 72 FPS in Microsoft Flight Simulator, and it even ekes out over 60 FPS in Starfield on low. On the face of it, that seems like a great performer, and honestly, it kind of is. Now, to add a bit of context, let me show you a few comparisons. While CS2 offered more than playable levels of performance, it's nearly a full 100 FPS lower than the next laptop up that I've tested, likely thanks to a much faster CPU. Cyberpunk 2 is a good 25% down on the next machine up, again likely thanks to the CPU and RAM config primarily. Hitman is by far the most interesting result though, because Hitman's built-in benchmark splits out both the CPU and GPU performance, and I show the GPU side here, so these results are as close to GPU specific as we can really get. Even when you do isolate the GPU on its own, as best as we can anyway, you still get a significant performance difference to even a 4060 with 8GB of VRAM. Still, the performance that's on tap here isn't all that bad, at least for gaming. For any productivity and creative workloads, especially with this spec, you're really gonna struggle. Owing to the fact that this is really just a quad-core with extra steps, the multi-threaded performance is abysmal by comparison. It's the slowest by a decent margin, although the single-threaded performance isn't all that bad. This is a 12th gen chip, so the architecture is on the older side by 2 generations, but it's still reasonable, which is likely why we got decent performance in gaming. Blender isn't any better, with the Gooseberry render in particular taking a little over 19 minutes to render. That's not great. Interestingly, it's a reasonably efficient chip, drawing a peak of just 56.5 watts during the Gooseberry render and hitting an expected 94 degrees Celsius at peak as well. That really isn't bad considering the GPU can be choking back 140 watts. One thing I should note here is that it's really pretty easy to get inside the Nitro 5, and inside you'll find a DDR5 SODIMM slot just waiting for an extra 8GB of RAM, which I think would unlock a decent chunk of performance too. Plus, you not only get a spare M.2 slot, but also a 2.5-inch drive bay. Now personally, I would rather have a larger battery here instead, as the 57 Wh unit that's included is pretty lackluster. But hey, if you want more storage, you can have it. Interestingly, the SSD that they've gone with here isn't a cheap DRAM-less drive, it's a Micron drive with DRAM. That's kind of a surprise considering that this very much feels like a cost-cutting machine. So yeah, I would budget for some more RAM and another SSD if I were getting this, or I would just get the one that comes with more storage and RAM from the factory. One of the most important aspects of a gaming laptop is the display. It doesn't matter how many frames the GPU can draw, if the display sucks, your gaming experience sucks. And sadly, this display is horrific. Like, genuinely, this display is one of the worst I've used on a gaming laptop. That isn't an overstatement or exaggeration, and I have the data to prove it. Using my open source response time tool, I measured those response times, and now normally I would test with a fixed RGB5 offset tolerance on either end, but for this display, both for accuracy's sake and to show you just how bad this thing is, I'm going to use the much more lenient and outdated VESA standard of 10% of the light level tolerance. Despite that significant advantage, the Nitro 5's 144Hz display takes, on average, over 16.7 milliseconds to draw a frame, with some taking upwards of 25 milliseconds. That means that this is a 60Hz panel. That's effectively what you're getting. It takes 16.7 milliseconds to draw a frame on average, which, converting that to a frame rate, is 60 Hz. That means that any motion on this screen, like say in a video game, is blurry and smeary and just a mess. It's incredibly difficult to aim well when the display hasn't finished drawing where your opponent actually is. Here's Aperture Grow's Frog Pursuit test in slow motion to show you what I mean. You have multiple ghosted frames on screen at once at all times. Like there's, what, 4, 5, 6 ghosted frames there? Now imagine that that's an enemy that you have to work out which one is the right one to aim at, all while your crosshairs are a blurry mess too. Equally, latency seems to suffer as well. OSRTT reported 8.3 milliseconds of on-display latency, which is over double what I'd want to see here. At 144Hz, I'd expect to see the average be more like 3.5 milliseconds, so for this to not even reach that with the fastest result, that being 4 milliseconds, that isn't promising. That's likely thanks to the 4050 being fed through the integrated graphics built into the CPU. That leads to a less than exceptional gaming experience. While I'm getting like 200 FPS in Siege, I can't see the enemies nor aim at them, so it doesn't really matter. The display alone is adding a significant level of challenge, and not a challenge you'd enjoy. One of the other reasons you can't see anything is the brightness. This tops out at just 250 nits, and unlike the OLED panels that I've used recently where 250 nits is more than adequate, this is really very dim, especially in my bright studio. It does have a reasonable contrast at around 1300 to 1, but that doesn't really help here. I also noticed almost immediately how dull the colours looked. It looks flat and muted, And it turns out that's because this can barely render a color. This covers just 67% of the sRGB color space, the smallest color space we test against, meaning the panel is just unable to saturate red or green or blue to any degree. That means that all content, whether that be games, YouTube videos, or films, looks bland and dull. It also entirely rules out any form of content creation, and also, to add insult to injury, the color accuracy result is dreadful too. The Spider X2 reported an average delta E of 9.21, with the majority of results literally off the charts levels of bad. So yeah, that ain't great. Another important element of a gaming laptop is the keyboard, and as a reprieve from the display, I'm happy to report that it's fine. It's fine. It's a bit mushy and sort of soft for my liking, but it's decent enough for gaming and serviceable for typing. The trackpad is fine too, no issues there. The I/O isn't too bad either. You've got 3 USB-A ports, 1 Type-C, 1 HDMI port, Ethernet, a combo headphone and a microphone jack, and DC in. So again, not too bad. So yeah, is this worth the money? Well, if you're using this with an external display most of the time, sure. If you need to look at this built-in display, definitely not. While I appreciate that this is a budget laptop, there is an acceptable limit for how slow and dull a display can be, and this soars straight past it. It doesn't matter if this gave you 1000 FPS in Cyberpunk or CS2, the display makes it a limited and more difficult gaming experience. With even a moderately faster, more vibrant panel, even if that added 50 quid to the price tag, this would be a fantastic budget option. But as it stands, I can't, in good conscience, recommend this. I am going to try and get some more comparable options in terms of the budget price tag in to see how they stack up too. And so if you want to see those reviews, make sure you hit the subscribe button and turn on the bell notification icon so you don't miss them. Equally, if you want to be able to test displays like this, you can pick up one of my open source response time tools that I make right here at home at osrtt.com. If you do happen to be interested in this Nitro 5, I will leave a link to it in the description if you want to check it out. But otherwise, there are also a load of other links in the description if you want to support the channel and support me and these videos and my work. And otherwise, that's kind of it. Feel free to check out plenty of other videos on the end cards. And yeah, thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed it. I'll see you all in the next video.